We've been reading and learning about conditioning in psychology. And conditioning refers to a specific form of learning in which behavior is somehow modified. The very notion of learning in psychology is accompanied by an understanding of a change in an organism's behavior, such as occurs in classical conditioning. However, classical conditioning isn't the only kind of conditioning out there. In fact, a far more prevalent form of learning associated with behavior has existed in human society since time immemorial. Studies in this other form of learning were pioneered towards the end of the century by an American psychologist named Edward Thorndike, who lived from 1874 to 1949. Unlike Pavlov, Thorndike was not really concerned with the association of stimuli and their effects on behavior. Instead, he was interested in the behavior itself, the consequences of the behavior, and particularly how consequences can shape behavior. The answer, he would argue, to the question of what motivates people and animals to behave the way they do has to do a great deal with the consequences of that behavior. To examine the relationship between behavior and consequences, Thorndike performed his own experiments, not on dogs, but on cats. Thorndike would place a hungry cat into a box, which he called a puzzle box, a crate, really, with only one possible way of escape. If the cat happens to strike a lever on the floor of the box, then the door would slide upwards and the cat would be free. Unfortunately for the poor cat, it doesn't know what the lever is or what it does. Therefore, the likelihood that it would actually hit the lever is quite low. Rather, I should say, it's improbable that the cat would deliberately hit the lever. However, the cat is aware that outside the box is food. It can see the food through the slats in its cage, and naturally, because it's so hungry, it wants the food. So the cat paces around inside the box looking for a way out. It wants the food, it knows the food is there, and as it paces around, it's aware of the lever. Eventually, purely by accident, the cat steps on the lever. The door slides open and the cat is freed and able to eat. Lucky cat. But now, tricky old Thorndike puts the cat back in the box again. Once again, the cat begins roaming around the box, and eventually it hits the lever and again is freed. And each time the cat is returned to the box, its behavior, hitting the lever, comes quicker, because it is learning that striking the lever is the way out, the way to the food. By the 13th or 14th time, the cat immediately pushes the lever. Originally, it took about 3 minutes for the cat to escape. Now, it takes about 5 seconds. So here's what we've got. The cat wants something, the food. The cat discovers that a particular behavior, hitting the lever, will allow it to get the food. Therefore, the consequences of hitting the lever have modified the cat's behavior, and it has learned to hit the lever based on the positive consequence, the reward of receiving the food. From his research, Thorndike constructed a number of laws of learning that basically stated that the process of learning is controlled by the consequences of one's behavior. Of these so-called laws, his most relevant principle is the law of effect. How does this work? Well, let's say you find yourself in a situation that stimulates action. There's a stimulus or multi-stimuli or multiple stimuli, and you respond. That's a key relationship in behavioral psychology, stimulus and response. The response is your action, your behavior. But it doesn't end there. Because your behavior might have consequences, according to Thorndike's law of effect, if your behavior is followed by bad consequences or no consequences at all, you're not likely to repeat the behavior. If your behavior is followed by good consequences, you will most likely repeat that behavior. A response, as he puts it, that leads to a satisfying state of affairs is strengthened, while responses that lead to annoying or dissatisfying consequences occur less and less frequently. This form of learning based on behavior and consequence, came to be known as instrumental conditioning. Thorndike's research also allowed him to formulate a second law, which he called the law of exercise. According to this law, the development of human intellect can really be explained in relation to two principal exercises or activities: trial and error and stimulus-response association. Through trial and error, the cat learned that it was the lever in the box that was the key to his escape and his acquisition of the food. And by repeated association of the stimuli of the box and lever and food outside to the response of hitting the lever and successfully obtaining food, the behavior of hitting the lever was strengthened. In other words, if you're faced with the same stimuli, the same environment each time, you tend to produce the same behavior. So, an individual tends to learn best through trial and error and through repetition of behavior in response to key stimuli. Or, as Thorndike's law of exercise states it, stimulus-response connections that are repeated are strengthened, while those that are not repeated are weakened. Thorndike employed this knowledge of learning and behavior in his construction of a new model of intelligence while he was developing intelligence tests for the U.S. Army during World War I. What was most intriguing about Thorndike's model of intelligence was that quite early on he already had concluded what many are coming to argue now, that there is more than one kind of intelligence. Thorndike suggested three intelligence or classes of intellectual functioning. Number one is abstract intelligence, which is that kind of intelligence that we are often tested for in school, tests about history or biology or vocabulary. Two is mechanical intelligence, which is the ability to visualize the relationships among objects and understand how the physical world works. And number three, social intelligence, which enables us to function successfully in social or interpersonal situations.